Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the HT Physio Quick Tips series. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 7 most common causes of pain at the front of the knee, how to spot these problems and what to do about them. Now, before we start, my name is Harlow and I'm the Over-50's specialist physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And if you are enjoying these videos, before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the videos as well, because it really helps me reach more people. Now, pain at the front of the knee is really common for people of all ages, but it's especially common for people in my age group, the people I treat, the over-50s category. And there are a few problems that can pop up for people of any age, and there are a few problems that pop up more specifically for people over the age of 50. Now, the good news is we can do something about most of these problems. So we're going to talk about each of the 7 things that I see most commonly as problems at the front of the knee and what to do about them. So to help me explain these problems, we have here my knee model. And I'm not going to go through all the structures in the knee, but this is the front view of the right knee. And we have the thigh bone here, we have the kneecap here that you can take away, we have the shin bone, the tibia here, and then these bits here, we have something called the quadriceps tendon here, which joins the thigh muscles to the kneecap, and we have the patellar tendon here, which joins the kneecap to the tibia, the shin bone. And this acts like a pulley system, so when the muscles contract, it pulls the kneecap up, which in turn pulls the tibia up. So that's basically how the knee works, how the front of the knee articulates. So let's talk about the problems that we see. Now, the first problem that we see, the first common front of the knee problem, is something we call patellar tendonitis. Now, patellar tendonitis is also called jumper's knee because it's very common in people who do sports that involve lots of jumping. And it basically involves pain here. So pain right at the front of the knee, just underneath the kneecap, right on this patellar tendon. Okay, and it typically presents as soreness, some achiness. You might feel pain when you prod just underneath the kneecap at the patellar tendon. And it often gets worse after sports. It can sometimes feel very painful when you first start exercising and then the pain wears off as you get warm. And it's worse for people who do lots of jumping sports like volleyball, goalkeepers in football can sometimes get it. People in sports that involve lots of high impact leaping up in the air. So patellar tendonitis tends to just stay painful here. It doesn't spread around unless it gets really bad. And the way that we treat that is we improve the flexibility of the quadriceps, the thigh muscles, and we improve the strength of the muscles that control the kneecap, and we improve the strength of the muscles that control the alignment of the knee. It also needs ice, it also needs rest from some of the things that aggravate it, and if those things can all be checked off, then we can get patellar tendonitis better. So that's the first problem we see that causes pain at the front of the knee. Now, the second problem that causes pain at the front of the knee is irritation to the patellofemoral fat pad or the patellofemoral joint. So to make this a more easily explainable problem, we're going to call this patellofemoral pain syndrome because it encompasses lots of different things that cause pain around the patella. So if you've got more diffuse pain that goes around the front of the knee, maybe you've got swelling underneath the kneecap, maybe you have pain when you're coming downstairs or pain when you try to fully extend your knee, to lock your knee out, you could be suffering from patellofemoral pain syndrome. Now, around the kneecap, we have a load of really sensitive structures that can be irritated if the kneecap is not moving quite right. And that's what causes this problem. Now, the good thing about patellofemoral pain syndrome is if we scanned your knee, we probably wouldn't see very much wrong with it because it's not really a problem that tends to show up as wear and tear or degeneration or arthritis. It can happen to people of any age, and we call it a mechanical problem, which means it's to do with the way the kneecap is moving. So to fix it, Quite simply, we just need to fix the way the kneecap's moving. So we would do that through a combination of strengthening, stretching, and improving the mechanics of the knee. So that's a really common problem. It can also cause clicking. So clicking doesn't always have to be from arthritis. And that's probably the most common cause of front of the knee pain that we see here. Now, the next common cause of front of the knee pain is arthritis behind the kneecap. We would call this patellofemoral joint arthritis. Now, the kneecap has a layer of cartilage which sits behind it here. The femur, which is the thigh bone, has a layer of cartilage which sits here. And those cartilage layers cushion the movement of the kneecap on the femur when it slides up and down like this when we bend our knee. Now, if that cartilage starts to wear down, the two bony surfaces come closer together and that creates more friction. It can rub, it can cause irritation that looks a lot like patellofemoral pain syndrome. The difference will be it's much more painful in the morning, so for the first 15 minutes. It will cause a lot more clicking, clunking and creaking, and it tends to affect people over the age of 60, 65 more commonly. Now, the only real way to tell the difference between the two is to get an assessment from a professional and to sometimes get some x-rays done to look at the space between the kneecap and the femur. So that's the third and one of the most common causes of pain at the front of the knee. Now, the fourth common cause of pain at the front of the knee is something called a pre-patellar bursitis. Now, this is also called housemaid's knee, and it's called housemaid's knee because it's most common in people who do a lot of kneeling on hard surfaces right on their kneecap. Now, the common sign is a very obvious sign when people have this because they get a massive lump of swelling at the front of the kneecap. It's not below the kneecap, it's not around the knee, it's right on top of the kneecap, and it can look like you've got a paintball in there sometimes, a big bubble. Now, it will be really painful to touch. It will feel like, something's really gone wrong in there. It will feel like you can't bear to kneel on it any longer. And it happens from impact on the front of the kneecap like that. It can either be one big bang or it can be lots of repetitive rubbing. So that's what gives it the housemaid's knee name, because housemaids would spend a lot of time on their knees, and that repetitive rubbing can trigger this swelling. Now, the pre-patellar bursitis is a swelling of something called the bursa, which is like a shock absorber at the front of the knee. It's usually quite good at doing its job, but if you aggravate it by hitting it repeatedly, it will suddenly swell up. Now, there's a few different options to treat it. You can put ice on it, you can rest it, and you can wait for it to go down. But for some people, the swelling stays, and for those people, they need it aspirated. So they need to have the swelling drained from it. It's less of a physiotherapy problem. We can help it and we can help people prevent it. But once it's there, rest, ice, and sometimes aspiration can help to improve your symptoms. Now, the next common cause of pain at the front of the knee isn't actually a knee problem at all. The cause is pain referred from the hip. Now, we see this very commonly, and people are often confused as to how this can happen. Often people can develop bad problems in their hip, so arthritis or pain at the side of the hip from a gluteal tendinopathy, and that can make not necessarily their hip hurt, but the front of their knee. And the way we usually see people talk about that is they say, I've just got this really vague pain at my knee. It doesn't tend to matter if my knee's bent or straight. It doesn't tend to matter if I'm weight bearing through my knee. It's just sometimes there, it's sometimes not. It's worse when I'm moving the hips, or it's worse when I'm putting my shoes and socks on. It's worse when I'm getting in and out of a car, and I can't work out why my knee hurts. Well, the reason your knee hurts is because of referred pain. Put simply, sometimes the brain gets confused when the body has a problem, and it doesn't quite know how to map out the signal of the pain. So it puts the pain in the wrong part of the body. Now, if this sounds a bit confusing, you're not alone. We've been trying to figure this out for many years. We don't fully understand how it works, but we know that somewhere the wires get crossed and the brain can interpret pain as coming from somewhere else. And one of the most common places for hip problems to present is at the front of the knee. So if your pain is very vague, it doesn't really follow a specific knee pattern, it could be coming from the hip. That also is more likely if you've got very restricted hip movement, or if you know you have arthritis in your hip, that could be what's causing your knee pain. Now, in a similar vein, people can often get knee pain at the front of the knee when it's referred from their lower back. Now, this tends to follow a more predictable pattern because we have one nerve which refers pain right down across the front of the thigh and down the front of the knee. Okay, we call this the L4 nerve. So if you have a disc problem or a facet joint problem or arthritis in the spine, in the lower back, around what we call the L4, which is the second vertebra up from the bottom, that can refer pain down the front of the knee. It tends to wrap around the front of the thigh and go down the inside of the shin, crossing over the front of the knee. So if you feel pain starting in your lower back and running down your leg and down the front of the knee, that could be a problem with your back, and your knee could have no problems at all. That's also very common. So we call that L4 radicular pain.